Coaching as Benevolence, a podcast for people who are curious about using coaching for self-development. I'm Eryn with Roots and Wings Grief and Loss Coaching.
And I'm L'Shawn with Michelle Sage Place Positive Intelligence Coaching. Hello, everyone. So today we are going to be talking about authenticity and what it means. We're going to be looking at different aspects of authenticity. It comes up a lot in our conversations at different episodes on this podcast. And we thought today we would really just hone in on authenticity, what it means, and how it shows up in personal life and professional life, in coaching. So Eryn, what comes up for you when you hear the word authenticity?
Yeah, authenticity in a coaching context is so invaluable for the individual to be able to explore, their specific wants and needs and how they navigate through those. And so I think as a coach, one of the things for me that authenticity really brings up is being able to create a space where people feel comfortable and feel like they can be seen and heard without judgment. So it's like, okay, well, how do you do that as a coach then, right? How do you provide that space for people to live authentically in one another's presence? And I think there are a few things that we as coaches can do to support the client authenticity. I think one is providing a space to allow them to explore what they are thinking and feeling by asking curious questions and by, repeating and summarizing what you've heard so that they can continue to expand on their own thinking and feeling to really get to that authentic place. I think sometimes, and comes up in coaching and counseling, it can be a little bit of self-disclosure, although rarely. As a coach, we don't want to, draw the attention to us in that way, but sometimes it can also help the client feel like they can express themselves authentically when we might share briefly. So those are a few things that come to mind for me as a professional. And then I think just as a society, just really in our day-to-day life, if we could value authenticity and more, right, I think we would reduce the amount of conflict in the world and in the workplace, and we would gain a broader understanding of one another to be able to relate to one another on a more meaningful level. So L'Shawn, that's where I went. Where do you go with this topic of authenticity?
Well, I like that you mentioned giving space for your clients in coaching to share their opinions or express themselves without judgment. And I think that's something that comes up for me in terms of authenticity, the sense of, just being real and honest, sincere, without worrying about, without judgment. And I think that's something that authenticity needs in order to be authentic, because I do think vulnerability is a major part of being authentic and having authenticity. So not having that judgment in a coaching space, I think is really important. Another thing that comes up for me with authenticity is just really understanding what it is. Because some people might think authenticity is just doing things that are unconventional or maybe controversial, or some people might react to someone who is doing something that is against the mainstream, and they say they're being authentic as just, oh no, you're rebelling or you're just being contrary. And so I think it's really important to work on defining what authenticity is. And for me, authenticity is, on a personal level, being true to yourself and expressing yourself without fear or concern about what other people think. And that's where the judgment comes in. People are going to judge regardless. But I think authenticity requires self-awareness and self-knowledge and the comfort with discomfort of being oneself, even if it goes against the grain or it's not conventional, or maybe people won't understand me or respect me, that kind of thing. So when I think of authenticity, my curiosity really goes to what is authenticity and how can I know I'm being authentic? How about you, Eryn? What comes up for you with those thoughts there?
Yeah, I like what you're talking about in terms of defining authenticity. And I think authenticity, when we're truly in our authentic selves, we likely aren't making decisions out of a fear response or, speaking to others out of that response. I think it comes from a space of empowerment, not for oneself and one's own authenticity, but for others as well. And I know that can come up in authenticity. It's like, well, I can say whatever I want, even if it's harmful to others, because that's authentic and that's exactly what I think. And I don't think that's what authenticity is at all. And I think we also need to be able to stumble in our conversations, and coaching provides that space. I think it's so important in that coaching space that they do maybe stumble with some of those really big and difficult feelings that might, when set outside of the space, be more harmful to others. Because if we don't have the chance to be seen and we bottle up those negative parts of ourselves, I think we can get to a lot of trouble with like hate and violence and things too. So I don't know why I went down a little bit of this rabbit hole towards that direction with it. On the flip side, authenticity also, comes out of a place of love, right? And so when we're being authentic, I think we're going back to the purest form of who we are supposed to be, who we are meant to be. And, we can enter that space without judgment. And that can be hard too, because we don't get to live in that space in society, right? And it can be a really, using the word again, empowering space for oneself and for others, to be in that like kind of more love driven space. But it's really hard to do that and show up in that type of authenticity consistently in the society that we're a part of.
Yeah. I also feel like I liked what you said about empowerment. And I also like what you said about not just being authentic for yourself, but for other people. And what came up for me was just the thought of bringing up what feelings that come up for me, or, if the listeners can be thinking this too, when you think you're in an empowered state, like when you're empowered, when you take action from an inspired, empowered state of mind, what does that feel like? And I think that is another thing that's part of defining authenticity is how do we feel when we're authentic? And then mostly my experience is when I'm with an authentic person, I find it refreshing, disarming. I don't feel like I have to be on my guard. When someone is authentic, I feel like, okay, I can be authentic too. It's kind of contagious in that way for me. And it's a different feeling when someone is being, I don't know, just uncaringly talking or saying something like how they feel, but not really caring about the other person, coming from a place of fear. And when they're coming from a place of authenticity, coming from a place of sincerity, coming from a place of being themselves without any pretense or any ulterior motives, it's a very different feeling. And that's something that's come up for me when I was listening to you talk. And also, I think that you mentioned the coaching space and the conversations that happen in the coaching space. And one thing that came up for me is, can authenticity be learned? Can we, if we're feeling like, for example, I am a recovering people pleaser. So it's kind of my default, my safety mechanism to go into this mode of I'll do anything to please the other person and just kind of go into this automatic reactive state as opposed to being authentic. And one of the things that I have noticed in myself is that it does take a bit of an effort before you can really get into a natural, more automatic state of authenticity. And so when you mentioned conversations and coaching and work that we do with coaches and that we do as coaches with our clients, is a space where one can practice authenticity, be encouraged to be authentic, and also reap the benefits of authenticity as well. Because in therapy and coach, any therapeutic introspective work that we do requires authenticity. What are some things coming up for you there, Eryn?
Yeah, you said a lot of rich things, but one thing that really stuck out was around ulterior motives. When you said that, it was almost like I had this feeling of like authenticity and people's motivations behind their actions. And how that, even when one looks at that, right? Like what is the motivation? And how does that relate to one's authenticity and to maybe the people around them? I don't know. I think there's something there I haven't fully grappled with in my mind. I think it needs to further be explored about this idea that our motivations are, directly tied to our authenticity. And that brings up a big question then about like, why we make the decisions that we make, what we choose to do, those types of things. So it's very behavior based. And I know in coaching, we work a lot on behavior shifts and behavior change using various, change models and coaching skills. And so I'm wondering if I'm looking at this too microscopically and thinking about it as something like so behavior based in that way, and maybe want to take a step back and think a little bit more about authenticity as even just the way of being, not necessarily just our behavior or our thoughts, our actions, our words. But there's also this other piece of just, I don't know, existing in a way that is authentic. And so, yeah, what do you think that looks like when we're just like existing authentically?
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, because when you kind of responded to what I said about motivation or ulterior motives and motivation, and one thing that popped up in my mind was what would be the motivation behind authenticity? And is there motivation? Because that goes to the discussion of being, that goes to the discussion of just existing. And we did talk about that in terms of in another episode where we talked about being in the new year. And one of the things that did come up was the need to control the outcomes and so letting go of the need to control the outcomes. And I think that might be part of not really motivation, because the motivation could just be inauthenticity, just to be oneself. And that could be the only motivation. But I also thought maybe when we are authentic, because vulnerability is part of authenticity, because you do have to kind of open yourself up to the world. You have to let down that guard. And I believe, what if it's also part of connection? Because I find that when someone is authentic or someone comes into a situation open and without expectation or the need to control the outcomes, there's more opportunity to have a deeper, meaningful connection with the person, because you're actually interacting with their true self. And by that, I mean, it's kind of unpredictable too, because if a person comes to you with their authentic self and vulnerable, they're not following a script. They are responding, they're present with you. And that opens up. And this is one of the things that I find in coaching as well. So many things that you wouldn't be able to predict, or you would be able to, it's not like it's going by a script and this is the way it goes and this is the formula and this is what I can expect. It's much more, it's deeper and richer and more fulfilling. And so connection is something that comes up for me when I think about authenticity. How about you, Eryn?
Yeah, I like the word connection and the way that you talked about it. And I think as you were talking, I'm like, oh yes, and how this relates to my own intimate relationship with my spouse, and thinking about, we've been married for 14-ish years. I hope I got that right. But just all of that time that it has taken for us to get to where we are in terms of our authenticity with each other and our connection. Not saying that it has to be that much time, but there is this level of depth, I think, when you are in a relationship with an individual, whether that's a romantic partnership or not, that you kind of go through so many different life events that your own authenticity is just a constant. And so that person sees you for who you are and, how you respond to things and how you feel about things. And I don't think people get to be seen at that level, too often, right? And maybe that's inherently a positive thing in some ways, because there is that level of a shared relationship that brings, I don't know, a little bit of comfort to each other when you can be seen at that level. So maybe it is like something that would be shared outside of a deeper relationship. But I think connection, doesn't have to just be those long-term relationships either. And, people come in and out of our lives constantly, and we grow and learn from those relationships and those experiences. So our authentic self with that individual one day, likely shifts another day. And I think that's the other thing with authenticity that I want to point out is we are ever changing, and we are constantly swimming in this world where we're interacting with people and life events and bigger societal things, and it's every day. And so I think being able to be content with that authenticity in terms of how we change and grow throughout life is also a really important life skill for individuals, because as I tell my kids sometimes, like when they don't want to learn something new because it's hard, I remind them, well, this is at this stage of your development, right? Like if you don't learn this piece, then if you move forward here, you miss this very important part and are stuck. I don't say it exactly like this, but are stuck, in toddlerhood. And like that's the same for adults. If we aren't authentic and we don't open ourselves to lessons and life events, then we might be stuck. So yeah.
Yeah, that's a really good point. One thing that was really stuck out for me was the idea of growth and also you were talking about maturity when you were talking about your children. And I think that definitely authenticity is a mark of and also part of growing emotionally, psychologically as a human being. I think that's part of the growth as well. So, and also I wonder, this is a kind of curious point. If one does not allow themselves to be vulnerable or allow themselves to be authentic or never really takes the time to get to know who they are, and they are only reacting to their expectations or their perceived expectations of others or their duties, responsibilities in life, does that stunt our growth in terms of emotional intelligence, in terms of psychological health, that kind of thing? What do you think, Eryn? Do you think that can stunt your growth if you never really work on being authentic, or you just spend most of your life pleasing others or living up to a standard that's not yours or expectations that aren't yours?
Yeah, I think it'd stunt your growth in some ways. Let's say you're living up to standards that aren't yours. You might experience growth in other ways. But I think that overwhelmingly it does, because you don't get to that level of, having the opportunity to have self-actualization and realize your, purpose and meaning and kind of those bigger life questions. So I think it does. And then anytime we aren't intentional about developing something within ourselves, then it's likely not going to be as developed as if we were working on it. Just like in a workout or with our physical body. And those things. Again, it doesn't have to be about controlling the outcomes though. Like I know that I've got to work on myself, actualization and my authenticity. So I expect that I will be here by the end of the year. I don't think it has to be like that at all. But I do think there is a level of even those, and we've talked about micro moments where it's like, oh, why did I say that? Or why did I respond to that? And how can I shift my response if that's not working in the future? Some of those small changes, I think, have a big payoff with authenticity. And then, like, I have a question. I don't know how to phrase it, so I'm going to kind of stumble, I think, with phrasing it. But, authenticity, we want to be able to live in our best self and share that forward with others as well. And there is this level of authenticity where we, have our negative thoughts and our learned negative behaviors. And then when we look in the mirror, it's like, oh, I don't like this about me, or I don't like that about me, those things. How does authenticity maybe help in those situations, L'Shawn?
I think it goes back to, again, being aware of yourself, and also understanding that, the reality of the situation is we have many different emotions and different aspects of ourselves that we like or don't like, and that's okay. And I think authenticity is, being honest with yourself, and the no judgment. I like the idea of the no judgment, because, again, judgment does come from a place of fear. And I think when you're coming from a place of love, and you can look discerningly at aspects of yourself that aren't as satisfying as other aspects of yourself, or that you see as not as desirable as other parts of yourself, and you're able to look at it with compassion, and you're able to get curious about what it is about that part of yourself that you don't like. So if I'm going to speak about myself, one thing I don't like about myself is that I do have a tendency to please others. It's like an automatic thing. And so I have learned over time to look at that part of myself, one, as a child, an inner child that needs something. And what need do I have that's not being met? And so when I'm able to look at myself, when I'm in that people-pleasing mode, I'm able to look at myself with compassion. I do think that authenticity, that's part of it, because we've established that authenticity is a place of empowerment and a place of love. And if it is a place of love, then we should be able to have that compassion, that self-compassion for that part of ourselves that we're not so happy with, or that doesn't serve us. And so when we're able to look at those aspects of ourselves, the negative emotions, we'll be, okay, what's going on inside of me? What need is not being met? What unwanted thing is here? And how can I address that, integrate that, and have a better experience? And then sometimes you don't really have to change anything or have a better experience. It's just a matter of integration and acceptance. So in an attempt to clumsily answer your question, Eryn, I would say that authenticity does allow us some grace and some space to allow those parts of ourselves that are messy. What do you think?
Yeah. I like that you talked about integration and acceptance and allowing those parts of ourselves that are messy. And I think when we can allow those pieces with that compassionate lens and that non-judgment, we can access deeper parts of ourselves, I think, that are, as we talked about, empowering, but also fulfilling too, right? Like, I think there is this level of just joy or fulfillment when we're authentic. We know we're living in our true self. And so I think that's another piece of this as well. I really struggle in my own authenticity with acceptance and compassion when it comes to allowing the messiness of my qualities that I don't necessarily like or appreciate. And so that's been a lot of self-work that I continue to do, but also really struggle with it. And I'm trying to kind of understand a little bit more how authenticity as a concept can help me kind of move myself beyond those really terrible judgmental things I say about myself to a place of acceptance. And as you said, like, it's healing the inner child. There's a lot of hardwired things there that need to shift. And maybe I can also pull from this strategy of just authenticity and what that means when I do start to know those thoughts are coming up for me. And I will say one thing to even maybe pay attention to with those negative thoughts, and negative thoughts aren't always bad or wrong. They just are, right? But sometimes we don't even know they're playing in the background until we start to become more in tune with them. And so I think that's another thing with authenticity is being able to kind of notice things and be more aware. And as you talked about self-awareness earlier, when it comes to those aspects of ourselves.
Yeah, I agree with you there. I think it's really important to reiterate the what you said about negative thoughts are not necessarily bad, or they just are. And I think it's really important when we are seeking to be more authentic to allow ourselves those moments of anger, frustration, sadness, loneliness, all those things that come with being human. And instead of masking it or ignoring it, denying it, and even delving into it, because we know that too much of that could be really toxic. Just, going through it and experiencing it. And I think that's a part of authenticity as well. When we embrace what's going on inside of us and we're not meeting it with resistance. In other words, we are okay with, being uncomfortable for a while. And if we can come into something with curiosity, wow, that I'm really feeling angry right now. Wonder what that's about without judging ourselves for being angry. What a terrible person I am for being angry right now. As opposed to, ooh, I'm angry right now. I wonder what that's about. Ooh, what button did that push? What's going on with me? Let me see. Let me check in. And I think that's really important. That's another part of authenticity is embracing the experience, I guess, of whatever comes up without judgment. So one of the things I really wanted to touch on, and we did kind of to a certain extent, but the benefits of authenticity. I know that when we behave or we live in a place of love, it's a lot less stressful. We are better able to show compassion, feel compassion for others and ourselves. For me, when I'm in a place of love, I have peace and calm, no matter what's going on around me. And I think that's part of authenticity. And there's a kind of gentle knowing that everything's going to be okay when I let go of the need to control the outcomes and the need to even know what's going to happen. But just being able to be like, I'm feeling love for myself. I'm feeling love for the people around me. Whatever is happening will pass. I'll get through this. And that's part of it. So that's some of the benefits that I see in authenticity. How about you, Eryn?
Yeah, I like the reciprocity of it. Like when we tend to those difficult feelings and thoughts that are coming up for ourselves, we grow our compassion and you talked about compassion earlier to do that for others. And when we get to that space of doing that for others, I think it then feeds us even more often than our original, try on our compassion on ourselves, if that makes any sense. But I think it's that idea of giving back sometimes makes us feel better, for lack of better words, than giving to ourselves in some ways. But so that comes up for me a lot with authenticity. And then I think honesty also, we haven't really touched on that word yet, and there is some relationship there. But when we can live an honest life, I think that there's something there that makes it a little bit more, or it makes that compassion a little bit more accessible. So just really thinking about how authenticity creates the space for us to be honest and live honestly. And that also grows compassion. Because when we can be honest with ourselves, we can accept when others need to share their honesty and be compassionate toward them too. So I think that's another concept. I didn't really define honesty in terms of like its relationship to authenticity, but it's important. And I think the other thing with honesty that might be a little bit different than authenticity is really trying to discern sometimes when honesty is compassionate and when it is not. Maybe authenticity is the same. We have to discern when that's compassion, when it is not, but that's a tricky space to kind of navigate too.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Honesty and also not wanting to hurt other people. I think that's really important. I'm glad you brought up the honesty piece, though. I think that's really important. And one of the things that you said about honesty, being honest with ourselves, I think it kind of goes with compassion as well. When we can be kind, honest, and have grace for ourselves, I think it's easier for us to do it with others. When we can recognize and be discerning when we have difficult and undesirable parts of ourselves, it's easier for us to interact with people who are difficult or who we may not like, or who that we're having difficulty, people who are really dishonest, or people who are manipulative, or people who are maybe they have no tact and they're just too frank, and they say hurtful things. I think it's easier for us to, of course, be attuned to what's going on with us when we're interacting with them. But also, if we're practiced at doing this with our own parts of ourselves that are not so great, it's probably easier for us to give those people a benefit of the doubt. Of course, we want to protect ourselves from people who are harming us. Obviously, we're not just going to not protect ourselves. But that's a really good point that you were making about honesty, and also about how the reciprocity of that. Any other thoughts about authenticity that are coming up for you?
One thing that came up for me in our conversation, this is my former high school English teacher voice, is really, character development, right? And when you read a story, you really see how the protagonist and other characters evolve and develop. And so maybe it's, and we understand that character a little bit more wholly when we're, doing character analysis and those things. So we've talked about this in the past too in our podcast, but looking back at where we were, as an infant all the way to where we are today, and all the nuance that's existed in the space for so many years, and how that has built our authenticity too, and how that relates to our ways of living and being in the world. So sometimes it can be fun, right? Or not, not fun, either way, to look back at our past and really kind of see, what are the through lines, what are the threads, and then that gives us a little bit of a story or an analysis for us to use to make adjustments or move forward in a different way or stay on the course or whatever it may be. So that's the only other thing that really came up during our conversation.
That is such a good point, because one of the things that I was thinking about, before, when I was really living out of fear, and I was kind of I was presenting a persona to the world. It wasn't really me, and I didn't even know who I was or my true authentic self. And it was going back and seeing that thread or that common theme throughout my life that really helped me reconnect to who I was. And of course, it was always asking, do I really want this? Am I saying no because they want me to say no, or I feel like that would please them? Or am I saying it because I really want to say yes, but I'm denying myself? So I did have to really go through, one, getting to know myself better, and two, really tapping into my motivations. Like, what is this, my false self or my true self? And what are the feelings here? How do I feel? And I think the whole going back and looking at, your life is one way to find authenticity, by finding the common threads, and even finding where you may have been more authentic, because we're dynamic. We're not all the same. We're not made of stone. We're very fluid. And I think that's another part of authenticity, is recognizing, that we are dynamic beings. So that's a really good thought. And I I feel like we are very close to complete in this discussion, unless there's more that you can add to it before we move on to coaching nuggets.
I guess the only other thing is if there's someone who's listening who is dealing with a big change right now, or like in my case with this surgery and things like these, I mean, that's maybe not huge, but like sometimes the authenticity, I guess don't panic is what I'm trying to tell the listener when it comes to thinking about your authenticity and who you are amidst those big shifts and big things going on. Because there's so many outside factors in addition to just the change itself that one is navigating, even like whether there's different medication things or whatever it may be. So, I guess I just want people to feel a little bit reassured that, you can be who you are in the moment. And when you want to take that time and space to adjust or make a shift, then you can look and see, what might work for you. So that came up too. I don't know if I articulated that very well, but
no, I'm really glad you brought that up, because I would add to that, give yourself space and time. If you are experimenting with the idea of authenticity, give yourself space and time and try to take the pressure off. I would say, just to add to what you were saying, if you are going through a major life change or things are up in the air, really chaotic, it might not be the time to explore your authenticity. However, it could also be a good time, but that's really up to you. And it's really your journey. So I would encourage listeners who are considering, how authentic am I? How can I be more authentic? Do so lightly and with gentle and loving ways, with the gentle and loving thoughts in mind.
I think that probably brings us to a coaching nugget of wisdom for this episode. L'Shawn, do you have something?
I do. I was actually thinking of another kind of like challenge to our listeners to observe their environment. Where do you see authenticity? And what are marks of authenticity? And again, you want to take a detached, observant stance here, where you're not judging, you're discerning. And where do you see it in yourself? Where do you see it in others? Where do you see it in like fictional characters? Maybe just take an inventory of examples of authenticity in your life. And please share it with us.
Yeah, I really like that. I think I want to end with just confidence in your true self, because our true selves can be really scary because they're empowered and they're filled with love. So when you notice those moments of feeling that empowerment and that love and that level of confidence, embrace that. Don't run away from that, and really believe in yourself.
Thanks for joining us for Coaching as Benevolence. I'm L'Shawn with Mayshell's Sage Place, Positive Intelligence Coaching.
And I'm Eryn with Roots and Wings, Grief and Loss Coaching.
Have a benevolent day.